Hello and welcome to Creating a Culture of Strategic Decision Making. My name's Dr. Seth Nichols, and I'm the Director of Nichols Consulting Services. What I'd like to do in a few minutes' time is talk about precisely what it is we're here to achieve today and how I'd like to work with you to get there. But before we do that, I'd just like to present you with an image that I think is a really appropriate metaphor for the kinds of things that we'll be discussing today throughout the course. And that image is what's called an Ebbinghaus illusion. Is this an image with which we're already familiar? Some of you would be, I'd imagine. Yeah, Leanne, Fiona. All right. For those of you who perhaps are familiar with this image, what do we notice about it?
Those
Leanne?
who are familiar.
Yeah.
Um, well, I noticed that it appears as if the maroon circle on the right is bigger than the one on the left, but they're actually the same size.
I would have called it red, but we'll go with maroon. That's
Sure.
fine. No, that's all right. We'll make a decision and go with maroon. Yeah, that's right. The maroon dots in the middle are actually the same size. Okay, but I would imagine that to most people's glance, it would appear as though those two maroon dots are actually, in fact, different sizes. Yeah? And the point of this, and the reason I would suggest that it's quite an appropriate metaphor for the kind of material that we'll go through today, is that it illustrates the power of context, if you like. The context in which something is situated can have a profound effect on that particular phenomena. Okay, I had an interesting situation with this a couple of years ago. This image formed the cover of the course book for this program, and I sent it through to a client. And later she told me that she actually printed it out and then measured it with a ruler just to sort of check that I wasn't deceiving her. Turns out I wasn't, and they are in fact the same size. But I think you'd agree that because of the context, if you like, in which the maroon dots are nested, they look quite different. That context and that environment in which they're situated is having quite a profound impact. So I might come back to that towards the end of the day and sort of talk about the link between this as a metaphor and the kind of material that we've discussed. So what are we here to achieve today? I've said that at the broadest of levels, the goal is to provide you with skills, tools, and strategies to help you create a culture of strategic decision making within your organization. So, what's a culture of strategic decision making? I've said here that a culture of strategic decision making could be defined as an organizational environment conducive to decisions that are consistently and demonstrably aligned with organizational objectives and capabilities and maximizes the probability of good outcomes. Now, that's a bit of a mouthful, but I think it captures uh, what we'll be talking about today as a sort of a culture of strategic decision making. And again, we'll come back to that as a bit of a reference point as we progress, knowing that today is very much about organizational decision quality. And indeed, this course, just as a bit of an aside, is very much about how to deal with organizational rather than analytical complexity. Another one of the courses that we run is very much about analysis, whereas this is very much about organizational complexity, how to respond to it, given that within organizations we're very much dealing with people, okay, which are, of course, much more unruly than the numbers quite often, as many managers and executives would be well aware. And just to provide you with a short overview of the origins and logic of this course, I've said that this course has come out of my own professional experience over the last sort of 25 years as a professional in the workforce. It's come out of my postgraduate study. I have a PhD in political economy and public policy, so working in the public sector, as well as my experience as a business person running Nichols Consulting Services. And it's come out of academic research on which I've focused in terms of strategic decision making. It's very much a product of what you might talk about as evidence-based information on decision analysis and strategic decision making. And it's based on the idea that good decision making is the foundation of organizational success. As I'll talk about in a few moments' time, it really is the only thing over which we have any control in terms of the ways in which our organizations can achieve their objectives. As I said, it's the only thing over which we have control. And getting back to the Ebbinghaus illusion as an appropriate metaphor for the material presented today, I've said here that the environment in which individuals are situated can profoundly impact upon the quality of their decisions. As we'll discover as we progress through the material, and again, thinking about that Ebbinghaus illusion as a metaphor. And I've said here in bold that as a manager, you have the ability to shape the environment in which those decisions are made, for better or worse. Okay, and the reason that this program is specifically designed for managers and executives is because much of the material presented today will be of comparatively little use to junior and entry level employees, or those who don't have management responsibilities or aren't working in an executive position. Okay, I have had uh, junior employees end up in this program beyond my control at times, despite my recommendations. And I suspect that they can't relate to a lot of what we'll talk about today because they haven't managed people. Okay, so this is very much based on the idea that as a manager or an executive, you have the ability to disproportionately shape that environment in a way that junior employees don't, for example. So it's very much designed for that particular cohort. So in other words, I've said the logic on which this the logic on which this is based is that if I had one day to instruct managers and executives on how to successfully create an organizational environment conducive to high quality decisions, what would I tell them? Okay, if I had one day to help people to improve organizational decision quality and create that culture of strategic decision making. This course is very much the result. I've said it's designed to equip you with those skills, tools, and strategies that can be used to improve the performance of your organization, more effectively utilize the knowledge, skills, and experience of your staff, and deliver much greater value through strategic decision making. So that's very much one of the primary goals towards which this material is directed today. And as is the case with most of the programs we run at Nichols Consulting, I've said I'm seeking to provide you with knowledge, skills, and tools to help you to, first of all, understand the process, or the processes, if you like, by which human beings make decisions naturally. We talk about this as, as descriptive decision making. It's talked about in the academic literature as behavioral decision making. So, in the absence of the kind of decision training through which you'll go today, how do people make decisions? We need to understand that, as will become clear shortly, in order to then move on to those deliberative strategies, or those sort of conscious tools and strategies that we can employ to get better outcomes. It's designed to help you to understand how to make better decisions in both your professional and your personal life. One of the really good things about decision science, decision analysis, strategic decision making, and so forth, is that so often the principles on which good decision making and good practice are based can be applied to one's personal life as well to make better decisions. And I'll provide some examples of that as we progress. This is the sort of the normative aspect of decision making. Okay, so we understand this is how people make decisions naturally, or organizations. What can we then do in light of that through tools and using tools and techniques to actually improve the outcomes that people achieve? And it really is about improving the quality and consistencies of the decisions of your organization as a whole. Remembering, of course, that organizations don't make decisions. People within organizations make decisions. And people are flawed. They're subject to biases and decision traps about which we'll speak. Okay, quite entertainingly, I suspect. But there are some things that we can do to improve the environment in which decisions are made in a way that is very much conducive to decision quality, rather than sort of decisions made on the basis of biases and so forth. So we'll talk about that as we progress. So specifically, it's anticipated that by the end of this session, you'll be able to approach future decisions with an understanding of what constitutes a good decision and why. And the answer for some of you might be a little bit counterintuitive, as it quite often is. It's anticipated that you'll be able to identify a range of individual and organizational biases that can negatively impact upon organizational decision quality. So this material should render you able to spot some of what's going on in your organization in a way that perhaps in the past you might not have been able to quite so consciously or acutely. So it's really shines a spotlight on what's going on within an organization and provides you with some conceptual tools to help you be able to identify uh, flaws in decision making and ways in which your organization can take action to improve. It's anticipated that by the end of this session, this material will help to create a culture of strategic decision making in your organization. And I'll talk about, as I said a moment ago, what I mean by culture in this context, quite a specific definition, and hopefully that will get you thinking. And it's anticipated that you'll be able to improve your organization's capacity to respond to complex organizational and analytical challenges. So the emphasis today, as I said, is very much about the organizational, but we will be talking about the analytical to some degree as well, because the two are inseparable. We're always dealing with both organizational and analytical complexity as we make decisions within our organizations. And we'd like to improve your individual performance and add value to your organization by consistently making better decisions. I think that one of the things for which this is very helpful is what we might talk about as organizational learning. To sort of disseminate, if you like, um, helpful principles and ideas, as well as tools and techniques that can actually improve decision quality for your organization as a whole, regardless of how large your organization is. You might be working with 4 or 5 people, you might be working with 4 or 500, or even more. But I think that to the extent that these sorts of ideas can begin to permeate your organization, they really can have a big impact on decision quality. And they can make the difference between organizational survival or organizational failure or success. It's really quite extraordinary uh, how success and failure can hinge on one particular decision, for example, whether people within an organization are aware of that or not. So the idea is to disseminate this sort of material throughout your organization as far as possible. So to get us there, Module 1 will be talking about why it's so important to develop your decision-making skills, and of course, what a good decision actually is. We'll be talking about what I refer to as culture as a decision framework, yeah, in which decisions are taken and people are situated. It's well worth, I suppose, identifying that as a bit of a foundation on which to build as we progress. In Module 3, we'll be talking about overcoming biases and skills, tools, and techniques that you might employ to actually do that. It's very difficult to overcome biases, okay? It probably should be reducing biases or sort of mitigating their negative impacts. But interestingly, and we'll talk about this as we progress, we can also leverage some of those biases. There's a positive aspect to this. And we'll be doing some group work later on, which hopefully illustrates this point quite well, that we can leverage and harness people's different biases, tendencies, personality predisposition, and so forth. And we can look at each other's biases and try to sort of counterbalance them by forming diverse teams and so forth. But we'll talk about that as we progress. In the fourth of today's modules, we'll be talking about the kinds of leadership that the evidence and the literature suggest are conducive to high quality decision making. Okay, this is very much about working with people. It's not a leadership course per se, but I think this particular module is a really interesting lens through which to look at leadership from the perspective of decision making, if that makes sense. Because in order to make high quality decisions, there are certain leadership styles that the evidence suggests are much more favourable than others. So I'll talk about what the evidence suggests some of those are. In Module 5, we'll be talking about dialogue, advocacy, and authenticity. So I'll be talking about what we call a dialogue-based approach to decision making compared to that which takes place in many organisations, which is that advocacy-based approach. And I'll explain what I mean by that as we progress in the afternoon. And we'll be talking, very interestingly, I suspect, certainly from my perspective, about authenticity, okay? And why a culture of authenticity, and I'll explain what I mean by that as we progress, is so important, crucial in fact, for making high quality decisions. Okay, and I'll explain the logic of that in Module 5. And finally, we'll be talking about how to harness the power of difference. We'll be talking about conflict, diversity, and decision quality. Okay, and we're talking about why an appropriate level of conflict is incredibly useful, uh, tools and strategies, if you like, to um, achieve an appropriate level of conflict, constructive conflict. And we'll be talking again about the power of forming diverse teams as a means of counterbalancing each other's biases, and of course, generating different perspectives on problems and issues in order to work together to find the best possible solution to a problem, or perhaps even the optimal solution to a problem. I'm a bit cautious about that word, but I'll explain why that is. Because there are so many different ways in which we can approach these things. But yeah, that's what we'll be talking about right towards the end of the day. And then, of course, we'll wrap up and you can go away and digest all of the material you've digest all of the material that you've absorbed today. A couple of quick additional points. First of all, today's emphasis is very much on practicality and relevance. This is not an academic exercise. These courses are very much designed to equip you with knowledge, skills, and tools and strategies so that you can leave the course and begin to put these sorts of things into practice. Okay, but there is plenty of academic literature identified in the course book that accompanies this program, which, as I said, is very comprehensive and very much aligned with the material today. Some of the material might make you a little bit uncomfortable. It's designed to, okay? I think in order to achieve change, positive change, sometimes we need to be made a little bit uncomfortable. So some of it will. I'll be seeking to have you ask questions of yourselves, yeah, in relation to your own leadership style, how you handle conflict, what some of your own biases might be, not just as a human being, but very much as an individual. Because Leanne's biases might be different to Matt's. Matt's biases might be different to Brooke's. Brooke's might be different to Seth's. Okay? We all have our own personality predisposition, and I'll be engaging you in an exercise which is designed very much to identify some of those things personally, and then think about how we might mitigate them in a negative sense and perhaps harness them in a positive sense. So there'll be quite a bit of learning about oneself this afternoon. Today I'll be talking about the importance and centrality of things like emotional intelligence, trust, openness, and authenticity. But I hasten to add that this is not an episode of Oprah, okay? We're not here to talk about those things as an end in themselves, okay? I've said, make no mistake, this course is about improving performance and achieving superior results through better decision making. So while we'll talk about authenticity, trust, emotional intelligence competencies, and so forth, this is not an ethics course, okay? And we're not talking about those things as ends in themselves. That's not to say that ethics aren't important. That's not to say that those things are not important ends in themselves. That's simply to say that we'll be focusing on the prudential aspects of decision making today. In other words, how do we get more of what we want? How do we solve complex problems? How do we achieve superior results? It's very much a results-based approach. Again, not to undermine the importance of ethics and those sorts of things. That's another course. That's a different approach.